Right, so now we're moving on to video number 6, which is, what is it? Seasonality and water temperature. Seasonality and water temperature. So as I explained before, with the population dynamics research we did, we were looking at everything we could find, all the answers we could find. With seasonality, it means we didn't know whether the sharks came to the islands or these white shark sites such as Straits Bay, Dyer Island, Moss Bay for certain periods of the year and then disappeared. We had no idea. So we had to find that out. We had to discover this. We had to get the data on it. And then water temperature, because in the winter months the water temperature drops and in the summer months obviously the water temperature rises. We also want to know, does water temperature, so environmental conditions, do the environmental conditions have an influence on the number of sharks at these white shark sites or along the southern African coastline? Question is, in the winter months when the water temperature goes down, do the sharks move away to warmer waters? When the strong southeasterly winds come up in Gansbaai in the summer months and cause upwelling because the winds are offshore and the water temperature can drop from 18 degrees to 11 degrees overnight, does that affect the sharks? Do they move away? So these were the questions we were posing and the answers we were looking for. So when it comes to seasonality, we found that there is no seasonality along our coastline with great white sharks. The great white sharks are along our coastline throughout the year. There's no season for them as such. What we did find in Straits Bay, first of all, now Straits Bay has no seal colony. Straits Bay is just a bay and the sharks come into the bay to feed on reef fish. And I mean, I worked in Straits Bay many times, but I spent the entire year of 1993 working in Straits Bay, and we were on the water 9 out of 10 days through the whole year. And there was possibly 5 days, from what I remember, 5 days throughout the entire year that we didn't find great white sharks, just for whatever reason. So the sharks were there winter, summer, autumn and spring, right through the year. But now when you go to an area like Dyer Island, or you go to an area like Mossel Bay where you got the seal colony we call Shark Island, or you go to False Bay where you got Seal Island in False Bay, what we did find is that during the winter months, the sharks would congregate around the seal colonies. And when the summer months came, the sharks would leave the seal colonies and move some kilometers up the coast. Not even far, like in Mossel Bay, here's the seal colony here, and you'll have 20 sharks around the island today, and you'll have 15 sharks around the island tomorrow, and this will go on for months and months and months during the winter and autumn months. And then suddenly you'll start seeing the sharks start dwindling when it starts going towards summer. And then one day, boom, the sharks are not at the island anymore. And now you have to travel 10 or 15 or 20 kilometers further up the coast where there's no seal colony and there's just fish reefs, and that's where you find the sharks. So they're still in the bay, but they've moved from the island to the fish reefs. And then when the winter months come, they move from the fish reefs back to the islands. And that makes sense. That makes ecological sense to me. Because if the sharks were just, first of all, the sharks cannot just feed on seals. So, you can't just live on tequila. I'd love to be able to live on tequila, but I can't live just on tequila because I'm going to die. So the sharks cannot just live on seals. Therefore, they have to move and mix their diet. So they go and they start feeding on other sharks, small shark species. They feed on skates and rays. They move out to sea. They feed on tuna. They feed on yellowtail. They feed on octopus. They alter their diet. And it also depends on the size of the sharks as well. But in general, the sharks have to alter their diet in order to take in the different nutrients they require in order to survive. So that is why they have this movement. That is one of the reasons why they have this movement. The other reason I believe they have this movement is because from an island to the reefs, and then from the reefs to back to the islands during different periods of the year, is because imagine if you had 50 great white sharks around a seal colony like Seal Island or Shark Island in Mossel Bay. And that's all they fed on was seals. And let's say that seals, everything that was in a seal was enough for them to sustain themselves completely. They would eventually decimate the seal colony. So their movement also protects the environment. So it's almost like they're protecting their food source, because they feed on the seals, they hunt the seals, and then at a certain time of the year they move off and they leave the seals alone. They let the seals do their own thing. The seals reproduce. They continue being sustainable, and now the sharks go and they start feeding on the fish reefs and etc., etc. And in doing that, they also protect the reefs, because if they didn't go to the reefs and start feeding on the other smaller shark species, those shark species would proliferate and wipe out the reef system. So it's very balanced. It's a very intricately balanced environment. And we go out there and we fuck it up every time. And then we can't understand why the bay or this area is decimated of fish and sharks and squid and octopus, etc., etc. And I'm going to give you an example. Most shark fisheries last 8 years. I'm talking about commercial shark fisheries. Their average lifespan is 8 years. So that means that, let's say you've got a bay here called Shark Bay. And one day a fisherman goes out there and he hooks a shark. And wow, there's lots of sharks in this bay. And he starts catching sharks. And next thing you've got a building on the shore where they're starting to process the sharks that are caught. Generally, within 8 years, that fishery collapses, because the sharks cannot sustain the impact of commercial fishing. That's what happens. And in Australia, I wish I could remember the name. In Australia, I think it was somewhere off the Queensland coast, there was a very stable and a very healthy lobster fisheries, okay, and an octopus fisheries that went on for years and years and years, and it was managed, and people were catching lobster and people were catching octopus, and it was fine. Then a shark fisheries opened up, and they started catching the sharks, and within 8 years the shark fisheries collapsed, but the lobster fisheries and the octopus fisheries also collapsed. And the reason why everything collapsed was because the sharks were feeding on the octopus, and the octopus were feeding on the lobster. But the lobster industry was the main industry. So when the sharks were taken out and decimated, you had this proliferation of octopus, which completely wiped out the lobster industry. That's how intricate it is. So you have to be so very, very careful. So in any case, that is how the sharks move. They are not seasonal along the coastline. They are along our coastline throughout the year, but they move around in order to protect their environment and their food source. It's a natural process. All right, I hope you find that interesting. Now, water temperature, we also looked at water temperature, and great white sharks prefer temperate waters, and temperate waters is more like a Mediterranean sort of environment. Temperate waters are around 17, 16, 18, 20 degrees, 21 degrees Celsius. And then you get warm water, which is from, say, about 24 degrees upwards. And then you get cold water, which can go down to 9 degrees, 8 degrees, whatever it may be. We found great white sharks in the entire water temperature spectrum. We found great white sharks in 9 degrees of water, and we found great white sharks in 25 degrees of water. Great white sharks are found in the tropics, and great white sharks are found in frigid waters that are 5 or 6 or 7 degrees in temperature. One great white shark, 4.3 meter great white shark, was caught off Gough Island, and I think the water temperature down there is not more than 5 degrees. So you find great white sharks in all water temperatures. And obviously, when a great white shark swimming on the surface and he dives down 1.2 kilometers, the water down there is frigid. It's freezing cold. So along our coastline during our study period and still today, we find great white sharks in all water temperatures. But we did find, especially in our main sample areas, which was Gans Bay and Straits Bay, we found that the great white sharks were more prolific when the water was warmer. From about 18 degrees upwards, we found more great white sharks. And when the water became cooler, we found less great white sharks. But we're not sure if we found less great white sharks or if they just became more lethargic and therefore they didn't really come to the boat. They were just more lazy. But the bottom line is this, that water temperature doesn't affect the population in a significant manner. So what I'm trying to say is great white sharks don't have a specific water temperature that they want to live in. They can adapt and they accept different water temperatures, and you'll find them in 11 degrees, you'll find them in 15 degrees of water, you'll find them in 25 degrees of water, you'll even find them in 28 degrees Celsius water temperatures. So that is what I've got to tell you about water temperature. And what was the other thing? Seasonality. So there we go. And water temperature would actually play a role in seasonality. That's why I brought the two together, because seasonal changes change water temperature, water conditions, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll be moving on to the next one. Thanks very much.